Hey everyone, my name is José Santos. I am a 17-year-old Fide master from Portugal, and today I'm going to be starting out a series of Road to GM. So my goal in chess in general is to become a grandmaster, and I thought I would bring you guys along the way with me and keep analyzing my games that I play through the tournaments, and basically walk you through how I plan on getting there. Obviously, I can't be sure if I'll ever get there, but it is my goal. And so this series of videos is gonna be basically insightful on how I'm going to do that. So this game is taken from a tournament from last year here in Portugal. I have the white pieces, and I was playing against an international master from Spain, José Martín Duque. This game is very important because it is the game where I became a Fide master. So if you don't know, in order to become a Fide master, you need to cross the 2300 ELO threshold. And that's exactly what I did in this game. Note that this ELO that I had here prior to the game had been, raised because in that tournament I was already winning a bunch of points when I went into this game, and this is how it went. So we start out with the Sicilian, French variation, and Con variation, Bishop D3 Nf6, and Knight C3, which is a deviation already. Usually players like to get a Maroxy-bind type of structure with C4, so that's why they delay Knight C3. But I went Knight C3, Queen C7, Queen E2, again a slight deviation, D6, and Bishop E3. Now this I consider to be the first, I wouldn't call it inaccuracy, but it's not a concise move with my plan. So basically I already intended going G4 from this position. But I figured, okay, I'm going to develop my bishop first. But it doesn't make much sense because the queen is useful to control and support the e5 break in many positions. And also, if the bishop is on e3, usually the queen wants to be behind it on d2 to form a battery. It's just a more aesthetic and better setup for white. So this is sort of a mix-up between plans. And finally, I do go g4. Now, also because of this inclusion of bishop e3, I wasted a little bit too much time. And black can get a comfortable position with knight c5. And after g5, knight fd7. Which I thought was his plan during the game. I thought this was what he was going to do, pardon me. And I was probably going to follow up with f4 or something along those lines. But he surprised me by playing h5. And after g5, it happens that the knight doesn't have a good square to retreat to. It doesn't want to go to h7. Because after h4, it would just be hemmed in there. So it comes to g4. But now after bishop e2, the knight is very short on squares. I'm threatening f4 to cut away its last square, and then h3 to trap it. So he basically had to go for this knight e5 move, which is not ideal because after f4, again, he has to trade, which was what he intended on doing. But this trade greatly favors white because I open up the c-file, and so he prophylactically moves the queen away from the c-file with queen b6 with a double attack here on the knight and the pawn. And I play bishop e3, eyeing some discoveries on the queen already, like knight takes e6. So he goes knight c5, which is basically an only move. I'm sort of getting the knight to a more active square, but more importantly, breaking this this line of sight here. I could rook b1 threatening b4 to dislodge the knight, and then again get a discovery. So a5 was the only move. Now, I provoked this move because I wanted the b5 square for my knights, and that square will be very useful in the future. And now I played g6, which is a typical move in the Sicilians. when white is, creating this pawn storm on the king side. Black hasn't even castled, so I'm trying to open up files and lines towards this king. F5 would have been more precise, much more precise, in fact, because what the computer points out here is that I can wait around with the idea of g6. I don't have to do it immediately, and it's not that black is getting checkmated, immediately at least. Moreover, it's the fact that black doesn't have counterplays. So, for example, if black tries, by the way, I should just cut out the idea of castling because h5 is just dropping. So here I can castle myself. And he can't do the same, and I'm still going for g6 at some point. If he tries castling long, I can just go for g6, and it's a little bit stronger. Basically, I want a tempo since he can't really castle because I just take here on f7. And he shouldn't take on g6 because I take on e6 and then get a knight to d5. So I played g6 immediately. He took f5. And now bishop e7. Basically, I'm breaking open the lines towards his king. And he is already in very, very deep trouble. Basically, my idea is to get this pawn away from e6 so I can plop a knight on d4. So he goes bishop e7, I took on e6. He can't take. Note that he can't take because there would be it would be dropping a piece since the bishop would gain a tempo on the queen. Same thing with bishop takes. I just take, and there's a pin here to the knight. So he's forced to live with this pawn here, which is a big, big thorn in his position. He goes castles and rook g1. So I played very, conceptually, classically, you can say here. I wasn't spending too much time around this moment. I probably had around half an hour advantage on a clock. I was just trying to put pressure, make natural moves, and I knew the position was just very good. So the position sort of just flows. That's something that's very important in chess. You have to be practical, right? Even if you want to find the best moves all the time, you just can't. Basically, by several reasons, you get tired, you burn too much clock. So you have to be practical at points. And here I felt like rook g1 is a move that I made very quickly, and it is a very practical move, since I didn't feel like this was a critical position or a critical move. Queen e6, and here comes knight d5, and it just, once you see this move, you really realize, things have gone horribly wrong for black. So this bishop is loose. There's also perhaps a potential to give a fork here, which is not really what I intended on doing, because this knight, of course, is a very strong piece. So the bishop is hanging. He gives a check. King d2, defending the pawn on d3, which was hanging, and a4. So he is basically in a desperate situation. He couldn't have taken on e6 because I can trade and go knight c7, among other things. Taking on g6 is also winning. He goes a4. So in the same variation, he can, let's just illustrate that, some random move, h3. He can trade, knight c7, there's queen a5 check. So this is his main idea. I just took on g6, and he still gave this check. And, it happens a lot in chess that you're winning. And I believe it was Emanuel Lasker who said, the hardest thing to do in chess is to win a one game. And I don't want to give any spoilers alert. I don't want to give any spoilers away, I mean. But, yeah, this game featured some turnarounds. Now, he's trying desperately to just create some checks and create some chaos. After king c2, he goes knight takes e6, with the idea of giving away a piece to open up the c file. Now, white is completely winning here, but it just so happens that you have to keep your head cool and keep you can never just assume your opponent is lost and you can do whatever you want. And I I fell a little bit into that trap here. You know, I was seeing that I was winning. I knew I was completely winning. I was gonna become a Fide master, which is obviously an important title, at least for me. And there's several ways to win here. Rook Bg1 is by far the simplest and the best one. So you don't even take the piece because you see that the threat on G7 is just greater than that, and that's just gonna put an end to the game. So right now I'm turning to take and take. He can't really defend it in any way. This is like plus 11 for white. It also gives the king a square on b1, which, as we'll see, is important. The move I played is completely winning too, knight takes e6, but it requires me, after this check, it requires me to see an only move here for white. So if you look at this position for a couple seconds, you realize there's only two moves white can make. One equalizes the game, the other one is completely winning. So the move I made was knight c3, which is a blunder. King d1 was the correct move, and this is completely winning. Now, of course, it's not a pleasing move visually. You're, disconnecting the rook from getting across to the other side. You sort of put your king, it seems like there's a lot of lines here, but white just has enough pieces to where black can't really create any threats. Knight c3 looks like a very natural move. I was just gonna go rook d1, and I was literally ready to shake hands at this moment. And this is when I realized chess is very ruthless. No, just kidding. I didn't realize that now. But h3 came. It looks like such a harmless move, but it's actually a really good move. And out of this desperation, he managed to find something that saves the game. So b4, right? Because he's threatening to take my knight. So I go b4, I went up on the screen, and I just thought, okay, I'm going to go rook b3, and I'm winning. If I can go rook b3 right now, I'm completely winning. He doesn't even have any practical chances, but he took on c3. And at this moment, I realized I screwed up, right? I don't have anything better to do than to take. Now notice he's a full rook down, but by geometrical reasons, tactical reasons, he is getting the rook back. Believe it or not. So first things first, king b3. There's queen f7 with this deadly pin, and notice how none of white's pieces can defend the rook. So this is gonna be good for black. What else? King d2 and queen f7, and you may think, okay, let me just take some pawn, whatever. And now there's queen takes c2, which I missed a couple moves ago, and this saves the game, right? Moreover, this variation wins for black because he's either taking the queen or the rook, and he's just gonna have a bunch of checks and just it's completely winning for black. So I had to go queen d1, which is a very sad move. Queen d1, queen takes rook, and queen b3. So with this little maneuver, I managed to trade queens at least. Notice how if I didn't trade queens, my king would be in great danger. So he trades, he goes rook f1. Now, in endings, rook endings, not only rook endings, but especially those, you have to strive to get your pieces, your rooks active. So you can't fall passive. For example, rook a8, defending the a3 pawn would be a terrible move for the simple reason that it's too passive. For example, I can either bring my king closer to the center, or I can go bishop f4, attacking this pawn. He starts having to defend everything, and then my king can slip in, and this is losing for black, or very close to losing. He goes rook f1, which is the correct move, so he gives this pawn away temporarily, but he's coming after my h2 pawn. So I take it. I have nothing better to do. And now he made a big mistake in the form of g5. What he should have played is rook h1. And we both missed a very concrete resource that was to come. So we both saw bishop f4. Okay, he attacks my pawn and defends his pawn. Now, this move, bishop e1 check, would have saved the game for a very specific reason. After he took my pawn, I was thinking rook b3, and I'm just going to take on b7. And I'm back to being a pawn up, and the position is healthy, but he's got g5, which is a very, very good move, pointed out by my good old friend Stockfish. The point is that he's breaking the connection from this bishop to the pawn, and if he takes h2, he's going to take a2 at some point, and it's a draw. For example, takes, king f3, bishop c5, takes b7, takes a2, and it's a draw. I just don't have enough pawns. Even if this one falls, I just don't have enough pawns to win the game as white. So g5 would have been a very, very clever resource. Instead, he goes g5 immediately, which is a big mistake because there's this tactical reason, rook a5. People usually sleep on endings in the sense of tactics. They just think tactics are lie in the middle game and openings, but no, endings are mostly composed by tactics. And this pawn can't be defended. There's no rook g1. He can't push g4 because he loses h5. So he's going to lose this pawn, and that's big trouble for him. Rook h1, I take. He takes king e3, bishop e1. He tries to keep the bishop alive. I go e3. I consolidate my structure. And he goes h4. This is his only trump, so he must push it. And now I play this bishop f4 move. Now, have in mind that this was the 38th move. And by move 40, we got to time control. This was a classical tournament, obviously. And we were both very short in time. So it is relatively explained why bishop f4, accompanied by the counter blunder rook h3 check, was played. Now, the correct move here was bishop d2 check. And after king f3, rook h3 check, king g4, takes on d3, protects the bishop. And we would reach this position, which is a draw with several moves. And this variation isn't hard to see at all. But he goes check. King e2. Yeah, it's also worth mentioning that king d4 is much more precise. It would have cleaned up the game much faster. But king e2 is also decent. Bishop g3, rook g5 check, we trade. Now, he can't trade with the rook because he can't afford to trade rooks. Because, never forget this, king endings, a pawn up, in this case 2 pawns up, is 99% of the times winning for the side that has the extra pawn. While rook endings can often be drawn even 2 pawns down. So hg, and now there were several good moves. The best one is king e3. Activating the king, coming after these weak pawns. And the secret to this position is that white wants to get 2 connected passers. So let's say these 3 pawns that I'm highlighting come off the board. White is winning because he's got 2 connected passers and black has only got 1 pawn, which is also very far away from the king. That's important. So that's basically what I was trying to get. Yeah, king d3 would have been the best move. I played rook d5, which is also a decent move, but takes much longer to win. King e6, king f3, I take the pawn, come back with the king, and rook c3, rook h5. So I just have to eliminate one of these pawns now, and the position is winning. Ideally, the d6 pawn. So I start squeezing his pieces. I give a check, and he's forced to the back rank eventually. Now, as you all may know, rooks on the 7th rank, especially in endings, are very, very strong. They just cut off a lot of important squares. Usually, they cut off the enemy's king, and in this case, it's a very clear case of how an active king in endings is just so strong. Notice he couldn't have gone forward. I mean, because there would be rook d7, and this pawn has no defense. So king c8 and d4. I want to go king d5, but I need to take guard of my pawn first. So rook a4 check, king d5, rook b4, and rook g7. Now this is a good move. It's not an only move. but I do like the way I finished this game off. This is what you call Zugzwang. So Zugzwang in chess is when your opponent has no good moves. Now in this case, whatever he does, I'm going to increase my advantage substantially. So let's start out with king moves. King d8 drops the b7 pawn. King b8, well, that was played in the game, we'll get to that. Rook takes b5 check looks natural, but now I take this pawn, right? And the reason why I didn't take it here is because he takes this one, and again, remember, I want two connected passers to secure the win. So if he takes, I take, and I get the two connected passers, which grant me an easy win. What else does he do? If he waits around with rook a4, and I can go b6. And he doesn't have any more moves, so he goes king b8, and now he drops guard of this square on d7, which means I can take the pawn finally with the rook, and I won't lose any of these pawns. So this was sufficient for a win. Now notice the strength of the connected pass pawns. Again, it's important that this king is cut off, and it's not like on a3. That could be potentially more dangerous for white. But the connected passers are just very strong. A lot of moves win here. King d6, rook h8. I play d7, which is a nice way to finish off the game. Rook e1 and rook h6 check was the final move of the game. Reason being, after king b5, there's a very common pattern, rook e6. And I cut off the connection from the rook to the promotion square. So after he trades, if he doesn't have anything better to do, I can safely promote. So this is the game of how I got to a grandmaster. Excuse me. This is the game of how I got to Fide master. Again, my goal is to become a grandmaster. Somewhere in the future. And I will work for that. And meanwhile, I want to show you guys what, how I plan on getting there. What kinds of, how I'm studying, how I'm training. And a very important thing that probably heard before, you need to analyze your own games. So I plan on analyzing a lot of my games here on this series. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll be looking forward to make many more videos. Peace out.